The pleasure of hearing from our very own Dr. Beverly Irby. Dr. Irby is a Regents Professor in the Department of Educational Administration and Human Resource Development and serves as the Academic Dean for Academic Affairs in the College of Education and Human Development, now the School of Education and Human Development, at Texas A&M University. She's the Director for Educational Outreach and Leadership and the co-director for the Center of Research and Development in the Dual Language and Literacy Acquisition, two large college research, developmental design, and outreach centers. Due to her multiple contributions in a large-scale, gold standard randomized controlled trials, as well as qualitative research and design work, she has received wide recognition for such achievements both nationally and internationally. Dr. Irby has widely impacted the education field with her scholarly research, grants, and service with specific interests focused on social responsibility, including understanding the interactions of school elements such as leadership, instruction, language, inclusion, and equity, and how these critical components influence student learning and success. Dr. Irby was awarded the 2018-2019 Regents Professor Award, which is the most prestigious award given to faculty at Texas A&M University. Her scholarly impact places her among the top 1% in her field. Dr. Irby presents a living Aggie example who truly honors Texas A&M's mission as a land-grant institution. Today she'll be talking about the future of publishing. So, if we can give a big welcome to Dr. Beverly Irby and enjoy what she has to present with us today. I'm going to add her to a spotlight so we can all see her.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Wonderful. Okay. Thank you. So if I might have the slides, please.
Yes, ma'am. I'm going to pull them up. I'm going to pin you as a speaker. And here are your slides.
Okay. Thank you. So how do I just go forward down here? Because I've never, okay, right here. Thank you.
I've got it. I can move for you.
Okay. Thank you so much. So first of all, thank you so much for having me to speak at the Paths to Publication. And it's a real honor for me to be here and for us to have this particular venue for our graduate students and our professors. We also have professors here, I believe, from Kenya, and so we welcome them as well. So thank you all. I think I saw Dr. Yoder get on. She's at our McAllen Center. So thank you for coming in, stopping in for our Paths to Publication, everyone. I want to first acknowledge, before I began this work on and sharing about the future of publishing and academic publishing, I want to acknowledge my friend and colleague, and that's Dr. Bruce Herbert. You see his picture. He's the former director of scholarly communications in the Sterling Evans Library here at Texas A&M University. And he has always been very insightful and very supportive as I have asked numerous questions. He's also presented last year, I believe, with the Paths to Publication. So he's now over in agricultural leadership, I believe it is. So he has left the library and has moved back into academia. I mean, library is also academia, but anyway, he's moved back to a department. And I also want to tell you that he has little lambs. And so there are a couple of his little lambs on his farm. I think they're so darling. So anyway, just wanted to share that with you as well. So today, if you would advance, I don't know how to advance this. I'm sorry.
I got it.
Thank you. So the riding the curl of the publishing wave is what we're going to call this. So that's the top of the wave, and we're going to be riding that wave for a while. And I'd like to share with you how we got up to the top and then how we may be going further along the wave. I don't know if any of you are surfers. I'm not, but I watch surfing, so I really like it. And I think it's very adventurous. And this is too in terms of publishing. So what is the future of publishing? So one of the first curls of the wave that I want to talk about actually began, can you clip please,
Mhm.
23 years ago in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And actually, even before then, 26 years ago, I started the first online open access uh, journal. It's the Advancing Women in Leadership Journal um, for uh, for women's issues, gender issues, all gender issues as well. And so I started that journal with a colleague and Gretchen Glasscock out of San Antonio, who had Advancing Women website, which was a very, remember it's 26 years ago, so it's a long time ago. And so it was when we were just starting to get really a lot of things up on the internet. We had sites, and she had that site of Advancing Women. It was absolutely fabulous. It won many, many awards. And so went over to San Antonio, talked to her about starting or supporting this journal, Advancing Women in Leadership. It was open access. So she said yes. And we had a mission of social responsibility to make it open access because we wanted everyone around the world to have access to information, particularly about women's leadership, uh, girls in schools, and girls' issues, mothers' issues, and so on. So we wanted to really open that up. And so that has been the longest running journal online related to women's leadership issues and gender girls issues as well in the world. And so we still have it. It was debuted at AERA through the Research on Women in Education Special Interest Group in 1996. And then in 23 years ago, 3 years later, I met Ted Creighton, who was working at the University of Idaho State. But we met at a National Council for Professors of Educational Administration conference in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And he started at that time, we discussed it at the conference, and he initiated the education leadership review for the organization and the International Journal of Educational Leadership Preparations called IGEL. So he started that, but the first one was started as a hard copy. At that conference, I was not at Texas A&M, but I asked him, along with our department head, to come and join us. And so he did. He moved to Texas. And so that was 23 years ago. And so after he got to Texas, we began some other work, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. We go to the next slide. So the National Council, and there's the journal Education Leadership Review in hard copy, what it looks like. And that's published still by but it's online now by the organization. So the National Council of Professors of Educational Administration has since changed its name to the International Council for Professors of Educational Leadership, ICPEL. But it coincided, this work coincided with the first, what I call longitudinal shoreline revolutionary wave in publishing. And this was this 2000s, in the 2000s wave, brought digitization and consortia, and it made the world smaller because we began to really work the internet, and we began to have this information explosion. Consortia was that particular piece was also very important during this time period because it began to have EBSCO and all of those different groups coming together, bringing a knowledge base, Gestor and so on, began to really take hold in the internet, in the virtual space. Next slide. So the second wave hit in the 2010s, and it was related to workflow and open access. But it was in 2005, right before that, that the knowledge-based concept or open access publishing was initiated at scale. Now, I'm coming back to the NCPEA because at that time, we had an agreement to use the Connections Project, and was the world's fastest growing collection of open access scholarly knowledge. That was at Rice University, and also with and NCPEA headquarters was at Sam Houston State University, and it was then that Ted Creighton was the director of that particular organization, executive director. So we began to work with this growing collection with the Connections Project. It was the first ever in terms of a knowledge base for education and leadership. And so it was to develop a comprehensive set of writings, up-to-date information, where really members could go in and update information. If they published something, they could even go in and update it. You know how things get stale and old, but this way they could be updated. We'll come back to that in a little while. And then the Connections, excuse me, could you go back to that? I wasn't quite finished. Sorry. Thank you. So
There you go.
this Creative Commons copyright license means that any educator in the world would be able to use it or modify the materials, as I just said. And then Ted said that our discipline has talked about creating this kind of thing for almost 50 years. And remember, that was in 2005, but we've never really had the means to make it work. And now he said books are too expensive. There's no way to include everything or to keep them current. And you know how books are. I mean, we just got this one published. It's the, I don't know if you can see that, but it's the Principalship. There it is. Well, it was. You could sort of see it. It's the Principalship, a learning-centered approach. Now, this has been in the works for about a year. So we've tried to update it at the very last minute, Dr. Lunenberg and I. And then, but now, how can we go back in and make any updates? It's hard. But on these kinds of things, on the Creative Commons, we thought at the time that we could change things and we could keep the writings up to date. And so any member would be able to submit their writings to the knowledge base and build that knowledge base online, open access. So that was important. But so 2005, we began that workflow and open access process at a national scale with the National Council of Professors of Educational Administration. So we were part of that. I was a part of that as well. Okay, go ahead. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So continuing the second wave in the 2010s, then you can see the International Journal of Educational Leadership Preparation. And so in August of 2005, remember, we worked with Rice University, University of Houston on the Connections Project and published that particular journal. So it's been around for a long while too. And it's a very good journal, and they're all peer-reviewed and refereed journals. In March of 2013, the board committed the IGELP to the Open Education Resources Movement. Now, what is that? Open education resources are teaching and learning materials that anyone can use freely and adapt and reuse without charge. So open access resources are different from other resources an educator might use in that OERs have been given limited licensing rights. And that means they've been authored or created by an individual or organization that chooses to provide access to all at no charge. So NCPEA Publications is committed to providing access to all. And so this is key. So the same premise of the Advancing Women in Leadership Journal, also we did for a national organization. So I'm giving you this as an example of how publications have come about. And so we also had Fast Track, which is now Academic Express. It's similar to Scholar One or something like that that you may have submitted to in the past. Like if you're submitting to Emerald or Sage or whatever you're submitting to. So we might use something like that. And then since that, the ICPEL or IGEL has had 500 articles published, or over 500. And so anyway, just wanted to just share with you how this has exploded. Okay. So I think there are people in the waiting room. I'm trying to admit them. Sorry about that. I think okay. Sorry. Okay. And then we had a Cambrian moment actually in 14. The digital and networking technologies are prompting significant change and opportunities in publishing and scholarly communication process. So as we moved forward, that's what was happening and still is happening. So these disruptive technologies are causing the Academy to assess the traditional role of commercial publishers. We'll talk more about that, about copyright, about fair use, and about rankings of journals and the process of peer review. So we'll get more into that in just a moment. So what is happening now since this Cambrian moment in 2014? Go ahead, please. So now we're in this third wave in the 2020s. It's with AI and open access. These are things that are happening. So we have an open access expansion activity from the publishers or commercial companies. You've seen that happen. You've seen Sage Open and other companies that are actually going online. Of course, that's publishing online for a fee from them. And then there's support for open science movement from within the academic ranks. So we're pushing in Europe, or I know in the United Kingdom, there is a call, there's an open access movement, and the papers must be published open science. So this is coming also here from our academic ranks to have open access to these scientific papers that we publish. So the size of global academic publishing market has seen a growth in articles of between 5 to 6.5% per annum since 2018. Digital accounts for as much as 89% of the scientific and technical segment in 2020, representing a 10% increase in 2019. And then digital accounted for 77% of the global market in 2019. Now, tier 1 universities usually pay about $6 million for journal access. Tier 2 universities pay $1.8 million for journal access for all of their faculty members. And look at that. Texas A&M pays, this past year paid $26 million for us to have access to all the journals that we have access to in all of the fields. Interesting, right? That's amazing. So we are, from the academic ranks, from libraries in the universities, and universities are actually pushing for more open science movements. Now, if we can move on, please. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that too. So these emerging issues in open access, let's talk about that for a minute. If you have a federal grant, now, you're expected to have data open access to anyone. So someone could contact us and ask us for our data. And we would need, if it's federally funded, then we would need to actually provide it and give it to them. So our library supports publication repositories, training, funding for open access publication fees. Now, I don't know that that's going to happen this year. They have funded that in the past. I'm not sure that that's going to happen this year. I've sort of heard that it may not. And then data repositories soon, but actually we've started having those data repositories here at Texas A&M. Okay, next. There's also, you see, here's an example of open sharing of the paper and the data. This is not any of ours, but it's just an example of one. So those are some open access, and you can actually get to the data as well for that. Okay, that's an example. We have Oak Trust here at Texas A&M University. It is our institutional repository, and it's the faculty research collection. Graduate students can also place materials in there as well. So you can see the different communities and the Oak Trust, and some things that were added on the date that I pulled that. So we can add our materials in there. Okay. So that's open access, a way we can share. The data repository, we do have that as well. They've developed this, and the data are citable. It meets the funders' mandates that we have, and it supports the move to open science holistically. And you can link graduate student data also to the CAMU repository. Okay. We also, let me go back to that slide for just a minute, if you will. So we also have the Texas Digital Library. We're a member institution of Texas Digital Library. That's now where the Advancing Women Leadership Journal resides. Now, this Texas Digital Library has the Open Journal System, OJS, and that we've had some issues with that. It's growing, and there's some growing pains with that, but we do have access to that, and we have 3 journals out of our centers in that open journal system with Texas Digital Library, and we have a number of those from Texas A&M University, and those are all peer-reviewed journals, but 2 of them are also co-sponsored with the International Journal for International Council for Professors of Educational Leadership, okay, that I've mentioned before. So what is it, the expectations for transformative and translational research? Well, the outcome for researchers or scholars, what is it? There is an outcome. So sharing detailed research data is associated with increased citation rates. So that's coming from some research that some folks have done, and that's something that we know. So it does increase citation rates when we do share our research data, or that things are open access. If you have something in an open access journal, because it's easier for people to get to and to cite it. Okay, go ahead. So I want to talk a little bit about that, because here's an example of how publishing, COVID changed the world of publishing. This is publishing the preprint. I'm going to talk more about that in just a moment. But look at this. So the COVID preprints, this is to get the information out immediately. And so remember, this has not been, a preprint is not peer reviewed. So you remember during the apex of COVID that we had, the news stations would say, well, here is a paper, but it's not yet peer reviewed. You remember those, something like that on the comments? Well, that's what this is about. This was about preprints. And so the COVID-19 preprints were high, and you can see the non-COVID-19 preprints were a little bit lower, the percentages, and then that was from January to April. And then look at the time from preprint to posting of publications in terms of days. So our COVID preprints went very quickly, and so the non-COVID preprints took longer. Okay, next. I want to talk more about that. Look, how has publishing COVID research changed? Look at this. Look at the number of abstract reviews. The COVID preprints were higher in terms of just reviewing those abstracts than those that weren't on the preprints. And look at the PDF downloads, many more there as well. So there's a lot of engagement with preprints. Okay, keep going. So you can see the citations even. Look at the citations of the preprints. Now, folks cite them. They cited them on the news, but they also have been cited in other papers as well. So that's a preprint impact kind of viewpoint in blogs and tweets and news articles, and then just general citations. Interesting. We're going to talk a little bit about preprint for just a moment. So there are some issues with preprints. Of course, it's not peer reviewed. And so there could be flaws or errors in that. It could be deemed unworthy of being in some scientific journal. And by scientific, I mean the global scientific, using that term globally and holistically. So that might be a real issue. And then what if you have a preprint that's posted up and then it gets rejected in the end? So your preprint's up there, but your paper is rejected. So those are some real conflicting concerns, I guess, conflictive concerns related to preprints. So think about it. I think, of course, Bruce Herbert and I've talked about this. Hamad El-Faraji is also we're working on a little paper about preprints, but with Bruce Herbert. But the point is that he thinks that preprints are pretty good. And there are those advantages. We've just looked at those related to even with COVID publishing. But there are also some downturns and downsides to it. So just be cautious when you do a preprint submission. And I will tell the story. A friend of mine just recently passed away last week. He was a publisher in counseling education. He was an editor in counseling education. And so he always told this story. One time, someone had submitted a paper, and this is related to the preprint, but it wasn't preprint at the time. But someone had submitted a paper, and he was a big Adlerian psychologist guru in the country and around the world even. And he looked at the paper. And so whoever the author was had said, Watts, 2000 stated that blah, 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 whatever it was on Adlerian psychology. And he thought, I didn't say that. And so he looked at it, and it was, it was a secondary source per Smith, 2001. I'm just using those names. So he looked up Smith, 2001. Sure enough, Smith had said that he said it. So he called up Smith and said, hey, where did you find this? And, in that 2000 article. And so it was an error. He didn't say it at all. And then he called the author, and he said, what you need to do is check your primary sources, because I didn't say this, and Smith misquoted me. And so guess what? that paper was rejected immediately. So, and he's also the one that said to me, I always look at those references, and when I get a paper submitted, and I look at the references, and if the references are sloppy or messy, then I think the whole paper's messy, and I reject it. I send it back and say, get your paper in order, and resubmit. So anyway, those are some things from editors related to publishing, but it's also about preprint. So, you could have, you want to have the very, very best draft, best final draft to submit to a journal and for an editor, to a journal editor. So it's really critical that we do that, because sometimes they will desk reject us. That's what he did. Desk rejected those papers. But if we had submitted it as a preprint, it'd be up there, and then there would be errors in that. So think about that. Okay, let's go ahead. So the same platforms allow for, I don't know what's happening to these pictures. I'm so sorry that it's sort of messed up on our PowerPoints, but anyway, similar platforms allow for large scale analyses. So that's the thing that's coming. We want to have similar platforms so that we can do large scale analyses in the editor world and in publishing. And so we're moving away from unit level to the positioning of tools that we can, as it says, to unearth, as I had noted here, to unearth intelligence in a large body of content. And so, we've really come sort of full circle in 20 years or so from that time that I talked about to really freely available open access work, and having these similar platforms so that we can combine things and we can actually look across, and it's sort of like data mining, a large database mining. Okay, let's look at the next one, and I hope it comes out okay. All right, so I want to go ahead with the artificial intelligence, because these are initiatives that are underway. So the American Chemical Society has AI-assisted journal recommendations were incorporated into the review process, and it reduces rejections and it increases author satisfaction. So they're using AI in their journal recommendations and the review process. Rightful and Hindawi is another group, and that AI-based tool was created to offer language check during the submission process. And it resulted in authors accepting 87% of suggestions, which reduced the time to acceptance by 20 days with fewer rounds of reviews. So that's another way AI is coming into play with future publication. And then the selection of reviewers. Look at this one. Now, for you who are journal editors or reviewers, it's really hard right now, and it has been since COVID, to find reviewers for articles, for manuscripts, for any journal. We're having a difficult time. But it's the Optical Society of America. Look at that. AI tools were used to profile submissions and published papers in order to assist in identification of reviewers beyond those known to the editor. So in other words, it goes out and it crawls and it finds somebody who is very proficient in, like I see Dr. Islami on here. So like in terms of something in terms of linguistics that Dr. Islami publishes. So maybe we need someone to review that, and it would go out and crawl and find that person, and an expert to be able to review that for her. So anyway, that's an example. And then annotations of articles. Springer Nature. Tools were used to harvest the relation between entities to help annotate articles and construct knowledge graphs. So that's that larger platform and being able to pull things together and go in and analyze that. So that's really interesting information. Okay, go ahead to the next one. All right, the fourth wave is coming, and these are issues for the academy, I think, that we need to consider. So we have an increase in open access. That's number one. So traditional journals have aspects in terms of aspects of open access with articles free after 6 to 12 months is actually in place right now. So we have that happening with traditional journals, some of them at least. And then sometimes authors are allowed a preprint via a university repository. We could even do our preprints in our repository. Now that would work. They have not yet been accepted. Even the titles, sometimes when we submit a manuscript, we have one title, and then it comes back and we think, well, those are good comments from the reviewers. And so maybe we actually need to refocus that title a little bit better. And so we do, so that even the title changes. So we could even go in and do corrections even in our preprints if it's a university repository. It sort of becomes a white paper type of and you own, of course, your own copyright on those. And it's not exactly what's published. So that's another option. And then the funding agency requisites for data and information access, that's increasing that open access to scientific data. Number 2 is quality and social justice. So there are additional fees that we have to pay for those open access journals typically. Now that Advancing Women in Leadership journal, we have not had to pay anything over the years. No, we have no one to pay because we wanted open access and open opportunity for publication. That is our social justice or social responsibility that we have had, that I've had over these years with this particular journal. And in order for ICPEL to be a partner on that with Texas A&M, and actually that journal, when Gretchen Glasscock finished with her Advancing Women in Leadership and sold off her Advancing Women in Leadership website, then she donated the journal to Texas A&M, to the Education Leadership Research Center, and it was official with all of the general counsel and all of that. So we have that, and now we have a collaboration with the international organization. But we did not want, and none of the organizations that the organization that I belong to, we do not charge people for publishing their papers. So it is free, open access, and open opportunity for publishing without fees. But most of ours that we get into are from $900 to $3,500, more than $3,500. I mean, how can some people afford that? If you have something in a center, maybe you can afford it. But anyway, it's just incredible the amount of money that these journals are charging. So for open access, to be open access. But who's doing the work? Then they're charging us. We're doing the work, and then they're charging us to publish our work. So Elsevier example of our, this is an example of our justice and actual deception. So I think, it reminds me of that little, anyway, it's this little comment. Oh, what a tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive. And I think it's a deception by these publishing companies. We do the work and then we pay them to publish our work. So that's really interesting. And I think it's deceptive. And then access is limited if we continue, or we must submit to traditional journals. So, it's still that big, the journal, like $26 million that our university can pay to get those journals. But many universities around the world can't pay to get those journals in their library. So that's then limited access for those researchers in those universities. And for school people, school leaders need to have access to our work as well, and industry and sports and so on and so forth, all of our areas that we have. And there's a rise in predatory journals, and they're questionable publishers. one of the publishers I know, you need to check out these places where there are large, like I know one publisher has like 200 journals or so underneath the umbrella of the publishing house online. So, you need to check it out and check out who the owner is, sort of follow the money. And once we found that one owner had made racist comments, etc. So we withdrew from publishing in that particular, it was a whole big conglomeration of journals, but it was a specific journal. So we withdrew our name from that. And then number 3, I'm going to move on. Institutions cancel journal subscriptions. So university libraries, like I said, are spending increasing amounts of their budgets on journal subscriptions. And some medical journals can cost $30,000 annually. So if institutions do cancel an online subscription, they lose access to all past issues of that journal. So that's another issue with journals in the libraries. So, you cancel it this year, you can't get access to it in the past any longer. And the impact factors, number 4, just to think about that. The current methods include considering the number of publications. So the way that journals figure out their impact factor, they go out and see how many times your paper is published or their journal is cited. And that becomes their impact factor, the number of citations, and a person's position on the author list, the amount of grant funding, and so on is all considered. But AI could help us, artificial intelligence could help us track academic publications and from sharing of the preliminary data or research briefs to publications. So we could do that. But the other thing is about impact factors. I'd like for us to think about something else in the next slide related to impact factors. That's the way we currently do it, but I want us to think about other ways that we could look at impact factors. But those are issues these are all issues that we need to deal with in the academy. Increase in open access, what that means, quality and social justice, institutions canceling journal subscriptions and lack of access, and then impact factors going forward. Okay, and I think that's the 4th wave coming. So what is the future? So one, all means of publications a way of communicating our scholarship in a manner that is accessible, discoverable, and usable by other scholars and a worldwide society? That's a question that we have to answer in the academy. So what's important for you? Is it just like, oh, I've got to get these publications out and get them in a journal? I mean, it's, we want top journals. We do. I'm not saying we don't want to do that. But what's accessible, what's discoverable, and what's usable by other people worldwide? So we have to think about that as the academy, what's right. And then there's a question of true accessibility, along with ethical considerations for all of our publications. Related to number 1, there's the question of why research should be locked behind publications' paywalls or inaccessible journals, like traditional journals, or subscriptions. That's a question. So we have to wrestle with that as well. Number 3, much research has been found not to be replicable. Perhaps we need to consider ways in which we communicate our research to improve replicability. That's not only quantitative, that's qualitative work as well. So when I review papers, and as an editor emeritus of the mentoring and tutoring journal, that is that's something that I look at, particularly in qualitative. If it's not able to be replicated, if it's not clear enough, then I asked the authors to please clarify, clear it up and get it right so that I could pick it up. And if I wanted to replicate that study here from, maybe it was conducted in Ireland, but I want to conduct it here, then I want to have it cleaned up so that I can do that. And then number 4, open scholarship practices are new ways to conduct and communicate research so that research is accelerated and better able to address societal grand challenges. Consider the 6 principles of open science scholarship: open methodology, open source, open data, open access, open peer review. That's another thing that we need to consider. Who's reviewing and can they comment? People comment on it. And then open educational resources. So anyway, those are 6 principles of open science that we need to consider. And number 5, ultimately, this moves us from all of these considerations and these thoughts, just move us from just publishing to, quote, scholarly conversations and communications that are meaningful to our specific fields of inquiry, and to the continuation of building a solid knowledge base, coming back to that, not only here in the US, but also internationally as well. Those are our things that I think we need to consider in terms of the future of publishing. Thank you very much for listening. And in the end, I think Ted got it right way back there when he talked about that open-based knowledge and all of the things, that he was doing with the national organization. So I think he got it right. Thank you.
All right, so that is the end of our very first workshop with Dr. Irby on the future of publishing. So we're going to check the chat. And if you have any questions or maybe discussion topics that you want to address here in our last few minutes, then please drop it in and I can see.
Hi, Dr. Irby, this is Cindy. Oh, sorry.
Okay,
So
Cindy,
I never
go
really
ahead.
thought about what you said, kind of about the wall. We work a lot, especially in our college, with leaders in schools and public schools and just different partners across the state. I never really thought about the wall of access where our school leaders might not have access to the research, the deep, in those high-level peer-reviewed articles. And I know that some, we also try to balance to get some practitioner-level articles out. But it wasn't until you said that I was like, they don't even have the access that maybe we take for granted being part of the university and that $26 million fees that are paid, because it's easy for us to go and find it and thinking, why aren't people, reading this or know this, and they don't even have the opportunity for the funding to see it. So thank you for bringing that to.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other comments or?
Questions?
Okay,
I see
Dr.
lots of.
Sami, I think, has her name.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Irby, for very insightful presentation on especially open access journals. Now, one of the constraints that these journals that are not open access kind of create for the researchers and authors is that I believe even we cannot post our papers on different platforms to publicize it. Is that so? What is your knowledge and information about that? Because I know that, but I'm not very clear on what are the regulations on that, guidelines.
Well, the issue is for those kind of journals, we sign over our copyright, don't we? So we don't have the authority to post them even in the repository. We could post the location of it, there, but we don't have the authority to post it because it's a copyright, unless our university has some sort of agreement with that organization. But we even sometimes have to pay for copyright information to be placed in something else. I mean, it's really interesting. So, but in open access, most of the time, we retain our copyright. So our own copyright. So then we can post it.
Okay, and I see that Dr. Abdul Rahman has her hand up as well.
Thank you, Dr. Irby, for the great presentation. Actually, you raised a very important issue about the language that is using on the studies, like sometimes it's racist or sometimes they do not. I mean, the authors, maybe unintentionally, they use language that might not be like following the APA guideline. Because so like what I noticed, like the authors sometimes they only focus on the formatting of the APA, like the references, the in-text, the reference list, and all of the like titles, tables, figures, but they do not like pay attention much to the language also, because for the APA they have also like guideline of what you should use as a word which is appropriate or no. So do you think it will be good for our college or even our ELRC center to have kind of modules, or can have a kind of courses that teach APA guideline in order to help authors and new researchers to write their studies in a good way or in a correct way?
Well, that's great. A great idea. I think we've had some APA past publications, but that's something we might want to think about to talk about other issues other than just getting your references in good shape.
Exactly.
Before, like my friend who just passed away said, I'm just going to send it back and I'm rejecting it right off the bat. But anyway, just we might want to consider having a past publication on that. Yeah, thank you. We are working on, I'm working with Marcom for our school to get a grad page. We have grad talks as well. So I'm working on getting a grad page, and the GSAC, our Graduate Student Advisory Council in our school, actually sponsors grad talks, and also for our grad students. And also that's where they get up and they speak. They do a 3-minute presentation or something on their topic, sort of like their elevator speech, or the 3-minute dissertation kind of thing. So anyway, we're working to get that put up, and also past the publications of that site will also go in there, because they are a co-sponsor also, as you heard about, with past the publications, our grad students. Thank you. I think we have time for maybe one more.
We have Dr. Farji is raising his hand, and then we also have one question in the chat.
Okay.
So thank you so much, Dr. Irby, for the wonderful presentation. I just wanted to thank you for bringing or raising the point about the comparison between pre-printed versus printed. I like the example you gave at the time of COVID, because it was kind of like race, and people were racing to introduce information about what they found in the laboratories. And that's why an hour makes a difference. But when it comes to social sciences, we don't need to have this fever, this rush. So it's very important, like you said, we need to be careful that we have the final version of the work, where it is edited, where it is peer reviewed for the quality of publication. So thank you for bringing this to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we have just a couple more quick questions. What is the normal expected timeline for project data to be publicly shared? That was from Ms. Sutton Jones.
Yes, for Dr. Sutton Jones, we have to, I think that would have to be published for sure by the end of the project, after all data are cleaned and ready to be accessible. I mean, you wouldn't want to post or give somebody access to your data if it's not all cleaned up and ready to go. So there are guidelines on the federal, with the federal government related to data. So,
Okay.
mhm.
And then the very last question is by Miss Reese. I don't know if it's Dr. Reese, I'm not sure. But do you agree with the use of artificial intelligence for reducing submission response time?
Like from, I'm not sure I understand.
Maybe she can clarify.
Yes.
Hey, Dr. Irby. Good morning. It's because you mentioned that some journal, if I understood it correct, now use the artificial intelligence.
Mhm.
And I'd like to know that you agree with this tool. Do you think that it's helpful for us to reduce the time when you submission a paper?
Well, it, some have used that to like check the language in a paper, and that would reduce time to publication. You're asking about time to publication for the response?
Yeah, I ask it to you that you agree with this because when you talk about this, I think that maybe when you use this, you miss some great paper because, when you read some, it's one person reads some, they are able to understand better what the author talk about instead of one machine.
Yes. Well, I think what I agree with, and we actually are using artificial intelligence in our research. We're actually studying artificial intelligence for classroom observations of teachers. And we're studying artificial intelligence for in our centers for turnaround schools, use of data for turning around schools. So it does not take the person, the human, out of the picture. Even this didn't take the human out of the picture. It just helped with the suggestions in terms of language improvement. It's sort of like, when we're doing a paper or writing something in Word, sometimes it'll come up and say, oh, maybe this is too long of a sentence, or, oh, you've got the wrong verb, or something like that, And so I think it's doing that at a bigger scale. But it does not take the person out of the human out of the picture in terms of review, but it just helps cut down on the response time.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
All right.
All right, it is 11:02. That marks the end of our first pass to publication for the fall semester. I just want to thank you all so much for coming and thank Dr. Irby for kicking off our semester with this amazing presentation on things to consider when you are publishing for the future. So thank you all very much. I hope you have a great day.
Good. And Jordan Dunlap, your first pass to publication, leading us. You did a sterling job.
Oh, thank you. It will only get better, I promise.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Irby.
Good
It's
job.
excellent. Excellent. Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.